What is the Dusk chorus? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods, talking about nature one small step at a time. Lots of people have heard of the dawn chorus, the moment where morning explodes with the sounds of robins and other birds singing from their tree perches, and cardinals whistling down, and the wrens and the sparrows and the chickadees all joining in. It's one of the most joyful noises in all of nature, and we talked about it last week. But many people don't realize there's another kind of chorus happening too. This one's a little bit quieter and a little bit more strange, and the chorus happens when the sun goes down. The first thing you'll notice if you go out there, I went out to one of an oak savanna with a prairie under it the other night, and went like 20 minutes before dark, and something really happened. The first thing you hear is honk, honk. It's not honk, honk, but it's the Canada geese flying overhead. They're getting into their bedtime locations. And I could see them as they were flying in, and their voices carried through that air. And the other notice that made me stand up and look around were the cranes coming in. These would have been the sandhill cranes that we have in this particular area. And they started flying in and getting into the field and into the marshy areas. And boy, whenever you see them fly in and fly over your head, it's just remarkable. We were standing there taking pictures and videos of them flying in. And it's just beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful things with the sun setting and the cranes coming in. And their echoing call can be heard from very far away. The sandhill cranes have a very bugling call, and it can carry across many of the wetlands in the fields. When the cranes pass overhead at nighttime, I can even hear them when I'm in my bed. It sounds so amazing, just ancient and alive. Cranes have just one of the most beautiful calls of all. And they, like I said, they just echoes. Even when I'm in my bed, inside my house, I could hear them. But this is actually why we went out to the field in this oak savanna, because we wanted to hear and see the woodcocks sky dance. So at the moment that, this is what we were really looking for, we thought, we didn't hear anything. Their first thought is like, oh man, we really wanted to hear some woodcocks out there. And all of a sudden, we just didn't hear anything. So my friend was ready to go back and say, okay, this didn't work. We're not yet. Maybe they haven't come yet. And then all of a sudden, there was this little sort of beeping noise coming from the ground. Peet, peet. And if you ever heard it, it almost sounds like a squeezed rubber toy. And it's not musical at all. It's buzzy. And like I said, it suddenly it started coming out all over the place. We counted 8 separate woodcocks just in this little field area. Oh, there's one over there. There's one over there. And we could hear them calling in there. So we heard them, and we knew that there was a dance that they do at dusk that we weren't quite sure what it looked like. All of a sudden, this bird that was fairly close to us, I would say maybe, 15 feet in front of us, suddenly went up, straight up into the air, really high. It was getting dark, so it was very hard to see them. They can go about 300 feet or more when they go in there. And then this sound that they make changes completely. This little beeping noise they were making on the ground now almost sounded like I called it a drip drop noise. And it was coming from the sky. It's like little musical notes. And then the bird zigzags back towards the ground and then disappears again. Again, the American woodcock is amazing. It is a courtship display that they do in North America. The male stands in this open field, that's where we were, makes that call, that little, like I called it a beeping noise, but it's peent, peent, over and over again, and starts all over again. And then after a while, the bird, like I said, suddenly launches up in a spiral flight. It looked like, my friend, I forgot what it called, like a sack of potatoes flying. It was just a very weird flight pattern to it. Launched up, And then, like I said, the woodcock making this drip drop noise is actually not the voice. It's not a call. It is produced by the air vibrating through the primary feathers on the wings of the bird. And as the bird flies, rushing through these outer feathers creates this musical twittering noise. The scientists call it the sound a sonation. It is produced by movement rather instead of the voice. So the woodcock is basically using its musical feathers to produce this noise of its own. And then the spiral flight that the bird hovers for a few minutes and then zigzags back down to the ground while making this soft chirping noise as it begins to descend. And when it lands, it immediately starts beeping again. This whole performance starts over. A single male woodcock may repeat this sky dance dozens of times in a single evening to attract a mate. So that was amazing. And like I said, my friend and I were just about to go home and say, okay, well, we didn't find any woodcocks. And then we found 8 of them. So it was really stunning and one of our favorite nights. It was getting dark because, like I said, nighttime. So the iPhone was able to see the sky dance a little bit better than I could. I don't believe I got a video of it, but it's really cool. Then the other interesting thing was there was something that Merlin caught on there I did not hear at first, which was the snipe, the Wilson snipe. And what that bird does here in the North Woods is it does another kind of aerial display. And I didn't realize that the Wilson snipe was even back in town yet. It's a little bit early. It's maybe about 2 weeks early for this. But Merlin identified the snipe, and then I heard it, and that means they're in the area and they're breeding right now. What the male will do is climb high into the air and then dive towards the ground in this very dramatic display. And that dive, the wind rushes past the bird's tail feathers, makes them vibrate, and as a result, it sort of has this trembling sound called winnowing, and it echoes like throughout this marshland and this prairie that we heard it in. It sounded kind of eerie, and at first I didn't recognize it. I've heard snipes and Wilson snipes before, but once you hear it, then you'll really recognize, first of all, that the bird is not singing with its voice. It's coming from the feathers, but it's also another mating ritual that these birds do to attract a babe. So this is part of the night chorus as well. And they're not traditional songs as we think about them, but instead mechanical creations created by their wings and their feathers in this particular case. Then we're not quite yet in insect weather here in the North Woods. In fact, we're getting a snowstorm today, which is exciting. But all of this happens as something else is going on, like I said, with the closer to the ground. We did see some bugs and insects out there. Moths and beetles and other nighttime creatures start moving through the dark. And they are attractive to the birds who are there. So the woodcocks probe the ground looking for worms and other pieces. Later in the year, we do get something called nightjars. These are night hunters, and they begin to take over the nighttime soundscape. These birds specialize on hunting at night, and they are called nightjars. They are crazy. Alex said, I'll put a picture of them if I can find one up here. And they are birds that are called whippoorwills, common nighthawks, and these birds spend their time flying through the air. They have enormous scoopy mouths, and that allows them to open their mouths wide and scoop up bugs out of the air as they're flying by. Whippoorwills we have in this neck of the woods, not, like I said, quite yet. They'll come a little bit later in the year. They are hard to see, and actually I think they're endangered. So when you get a chance to hear one, it's a special treat. But what they do is they have a call that they repeat over and over again, sometimes hundreds of times, in a warm summer night. And the sound is, like you imagine, whippoorwill, whippoorwill, whippoorwill. And if you live near woods, open country, you might hear them calling long after sunset. There's an area, someday I'm going to drive down there. It's really dark, though. It's really kind of creepy. But supposedly people have heard whippoorwills in this particular area. So that's on my list. The other bird that I have seen is called the common nighthawk, and it's another amazing bird. Its name is a little bit misleading because it's, first of all, not a hawk. It's a member of the nightjar family, like the whippoorwill. But on the summer evenings, you may see them flying high overhead and making a sharp call. And during their courtship, the male will perform these dramatic dives through the air. And as he pulls out of the dive, the air again rushes through those primary feathers, producing a deep booming noise with the same mechanism like the woodcock and the snipe, as we talked about before. But instead, it's lower and much more dramatic. And once this bird is making the sound, it's not with their voice, it's with their feathers. So I saw a nighthawk, strangely enough, in the middle of the day. He was napping on a tree that was over a road. And so now we called him Nigel the Nighthawk, but he mostly was just resting. He took a couple flights we saw a little bit later where he was looking for bugs, but I think he's waiting for the nighttime to do a majority of his hunting. Of course, there's owls at night. That's one of the things I love about camping is how many owls you get to hear. They're the true masters of the night. Their wings are adapted to allow them to fly silently. The edges of the feathers have soft fringes, which breaks up the sound of the rushing air, which means owls can fly and you never hear it coming. And you might recognize some of its calls. They're some of the most recognizable calls in the night air. We think of the barred owl, which it sounds like, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? They're crazy callers. They make this deep echoing call, and it travels through the forest. The very first time I heard a barred owl, it was one I was camping, and I went to the park ranger who was driving around, and I said, last night I heard what sounded like wolves running through the forest. It sounded very wild, but it was going at a speed past my tent that a wolf could never run through a woods like that. And there were many of them. What was that? And she goes, those are barred owls. They fly across making these calls and calling back to each other. And it's just one of the most, it sounds ghostly, but oh, I love it. And like I said, it's my favorite thing while camping. The other part of it too is that when you hear these sounds at night, there's maybe millions of birds passing overhead during migration season. There are warblers, thrushes, sparrows, many others. And what they do is they travel under the cover of darkness when the air is a little bit more calmer and predators have a harder time seeing them. So scientists studying the weather will discover that during peak migration, huge rivers of birds are flying across our continent. And if you are in other continents, across your continent too, every single night. And there's even a prediction center, which I can put in the notes here, that shows you how many birds flew overnight over your county. So in the peak of it, you might get 35 million birds flying over your county on a given night. And so if you step outside and you hear a single goose or a crane out there, or maybe even hear a woodcock out there, chances are there are much larger movements of birds happening above us. It depends on the season and it depends on the week. Right now we are an early spring, but by the time we get into late April, early May, full migration is on. So like I said, the next time you step outside, pause for a minute and listen very carefully. You might hear the geese clacking through the noises. You might hear cranes calling and bugling out in the fields or overhead. But you even might hear like the peent of a woodcock in their sky dance, or an owl calling through the night, or maybe even birds migrating in. I even have bats that live in my gutters of my house, strangely enough, and I can hear them making a high-pitched noise as well. So that's the idea, this whole web of life where the bugs are out, the earthworms are out, the birds are making noise at night, the night hunters are out hunting, the birds that are looking for a babe are out there calling. And so that night chorus is quiet. Like I said, it's not as loud as the dawn chorus, but it is so full of life. And once you start paying attention, once it starts getting dark and dusk, you realize that the world is really never quite as silent as you think it is. Even at night, there's always buzzing and blossoming and squeaking all the time. Appreciate you being out there. Please remember you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. You can find all my podcasts at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. Put a comment if you're watching this on a chat channel and say, hey, appreciate you being out there.